Hi there, I'm Carrie Ellis, author of 21st Century Superhuman, and this is our 21st Century Superhuman guest show with Peter Moon. Peter Moon is an amazing author of books on time travel, both ancient and modern. And Peter, welcome today.
Well, thank you, Carrie. It's very nice to be here again with you.
Yes, this is part 2. And the last time we talked about your books around the Montauk Project in New York, Long Island, and the relationship to the Native American Montauk Indian tribe and their links to ancient Egypt. Some really fascinating information, which I just loved hearing about. You know so many details about this, and your understanding of this whole kind of hidden time travel experiment that was done in that area, and the earth energies of that area is just fascinating. So today, I'm really excited because you're going to take us with you to Romania, where further adventures in time travel and understanding kind of the malleability of this world we live in were revealed to you. So I will hand it off to you and say, please take us to Romania.
Well, I don't know quite where to begin, but I think it might pique everybody's interest if they look at this first book in the Transylvania series.
Absolutely.
Of which there are 5 books, and you see this Sphinx. This is a picture of a Sphinx in Romania, in the Bucegi Mountains. And this is...
and then what are those glyphs we're seeing on the mountainside behind it?
Well, those glyphs are an artistic rendition by the illustrator for this book cover, a friend of mine named Rick Smith. And those glyphs are actually inside the book. They're pictures, illustrations of a chamber beneath that Sphinx. That's what they are. They're not actually on the mountains there,
Nice.
although the mountains themselves are quite interesting.
And so you have 5 books in this series, is that correct?
That's correct. And it's a long and involved story, as was the Montauk story. But I think the best place to begin is on a summer day.
Let's just take a pause for 1 minute, because
Yep.
I want people to read your books. I think you should be cult reading for this time. And I think people should be getting these books and passing them around because there's such exciting material in here. So you have a website?
Yes, the books are available at skybooks.usa.com. Skybooks, just like it sounds, S-K-Y, books, USA at yahoo.com. They're also available from Amazon at Kindle.
Well, it's skybooksusa.com.
Yes, that's where you can get them direct from Skybooks, okay. Or you can get them from ebook form on Kindle, iTunes, or Nook. You can also get them in in bookstores, some bookstores, and you can also get them on Amazon.com itself. So they're not hard to access.
Great. So those links will be below this video, and we want to support people in finding your work. I know you also have upcoming workshops that you're doing online that have to do with the math of time travel. So that's really exciting material as well. But I'll let you go ahead and lead us on this journey.
Yes, and I can mention Galactic News. I don't remember if it's Galactic News Network or galacticnetworknews.com. One can sign up for the webinar. It's best to sign up before the end of the year for the best discount and price.
Again, we'll put the links below the video.
Yes. Now, okay, so I said it begins on a summer day. It was a Grand Cross eclipse, solar eclipse, August 11th, 1999, when a man named Dr. David Anderson walks into my life. And on that day, we were doing public meetings once a month about the Montauk Project. And we would give information to the public and receive information to the public. And this was one of the greatest developments, or I guess what you'd say, benefits to occur as far as trying to understand time travel. Because Dr. David Anderson came in and he listened to a lecture by Preston Nichols on time travel. He mentioned that he was a physicist. And then afterwards, in the anteroom, he approached me and told me who he was. He said, Dr. David Anderson, and I have a time travel research center on Long Island. And I said, oh, I know who you are, because he was a subscriber to our newsletter. He's followed our newsletter since 1999. I have a newsletter called the Montauk Pulse, which is available at skybooksusa.com. It's $19 a year, issued quarterly, where I keep people updated.
And it's in that newsletter that really exciting article on time travel is that?
Well, that's true. And that particular edition of the newsletter on how time travel works, the math and physics behind time travel, it's a 6-page newsletter. It's challenging for some to understand, but it's pretty easy to understand if you really apply yourself. It's not, the science is very simplified, and that's at digitalmontauk.com. On the menu bar, you go to the mathematics of time on the menu bar, and you can download that PDF.
And what I'd like to say, since reading that, it has helped me in just my visioning of things in my life and realizing that how bendable time is, and that we can call in future realities, we can call in a new kind of existence, that there's really neat ways to play with it in consciousness as well.
That's true, and your understanding will become even deeper as you watch the videos, because I'm able to go into deeper caverns of the consciousness regarding time.
Exciting.
And this is all thanks to the work of Dr. David Anderson, who personally tutored me in Romania on some of these concepts.
Exciting.
I sat lectures with him, and I got some personal tutoring, which was a great help, and a lot of independent research on my own with his work in mind that's helped me understand this and bring it into a very readable and a visual format so people can easily understand. Now, David, as I was saying, had a time travel research center. I knew who he was because he was a subscriber to our newsletter, but I did not, when I saw the stationery that he had subscribed, he wrote to us, I was not overly impressed by stationery, having been in the design business and know that anybody can create anything and make themselves look like XYZ. But as I began to talk to him, I saw there was great substance behind this man scientifically, incredible substance, and I could take him very seriously. I thought it might be a 19-year-old kid, because there was a lot of sophomoric enthusiasm for time travel when the Montauk Project was released. And there is an incredible amount of sophomoric enthusiasm for this, even on the higher levels of mathematics and physics. The approach is sophomoric. And it's not that these people aren't intelligent. They haven't been oriented. It's just like in the medical profession. You can't be stupid and become an MD, but you can sure be missing a lot of information. And you're trained in a certain way so that you do not necessarily see the forest from the trees. This is one of the problems with education.
So what was Dr. David Anderson's background that made him so knowledgeable?
Well, he worked in the Air Force.
Okay.
He worked in the Air Force, and while he was in the Air Force, he got degrees in engineering at, I think it was Cal State Long Beach, not far from where I grew up. And he got a master's in physics and a PhD in philosophy. All right? So he is an engineer and a physicist.
Interesting.
Which is certainly not completely unprecedented, but it's a rarity. As I've learned in my experiences talking to an engineer, another engineer who was, he said that physicists and engineers traditionally hate each other because engineers are pragmatic and practical, and physicists will sit there playing abstract chess in their mind. So this has been one of the paradigms of science and technology. So engineers are more geared toward technology. Physicists are more geared towards pure science. So in any case, he was both, and he successfully has bridged these two worlds together.
Nice.
He took an interest in me because, like many other people in the 1990s, he had read the book, The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. And at that time, he was creating a time travel museum. And he wanted to have all sorts of exhibitions to show what mankind had come up with on the subject of time travel. He had a lot of artwork that was sent to him. He had a comic book collection on everything about time travel in comic book form. He had books, all sorts of books on physics, all sorts of books in the, what you might call the science fiction genre. And of course, the Montauk Project fits in between science fiction and nonfiction. And the tagline for the company that I own, Sky Books, is where science fiction meets reality. So this is exactly where the Montauk Project sits. And he read that book. And he would eventually tell me that that book, the Montauk Project's Experiments in Time, woke him up.
Wow.
Spiritually.
Wow.
And he told me in my first meeting with him, after we met, we had a second meeting, he took me out to lunch, and he said that one of the biggest issues coming up in physics at that time was that people in physics were beginning to look into the spiritual component of consciousness or humanity. Now, it's been mentioned elsewhere, but one of the things that was not recognized by physicists in years past was that the observer, the creature or the identity they call the observer, is the spirit. It's the same thing, the observer. Well, the observer this, the observer that. Well, what else is an observer? It's the spirit.
Nice.
So this has been better integrated into humanity's thinking in the last few years,
yes.
But it comes slowly.
And this is one of the reasons we call this the shift of the ages. One of the reasons we call this the greatest evolutionary leap in human history. It's because from just a scientific standpoint, we're beginning to grasp these principles that have been, obscurely carried forward in various, religions and philosophies over the ages.
Well, this gets very intriguing, and it even gets intriguing because you're talking about, and I'm going to digress for a second because you talk about the superhuman. Is it called right. The 21st Century Superhuman?
Yes,
that's
correct.
Yep. Well, yes. The superhuman becomes, and this is the transition, is where you become to understand these principles and you see them and you can integrate them into your own mind, body, and soul. And this begins with the basic four forces that are recognized in the universe. And this is what physics calls them. Weak force, strong force, electromagnetic force, and gravity.
So I wonder if that has to do with the four directions, that the Native Americans carried forward.
These are different.
Okay.
There are four directions, and certainly these might relate or integrate to the four directions.
So tell us again what they are, the four forces.
Well, this is standard physics, by the way.
Okay.
Weak force, strong force, electromagnetic force, and gravity.
Neat.
And I will just say one thing, and this integrates right into Qigong training.
Right.
Because when you see a Qigong master or a martial arts master who may or may not be calling what he uses Qigong, they can do phenomena, literal yes. phenomena yep. that would equate to the 21st century superhuman.
Right.
Or what L. Ron Hubbard called the operating Thetan, Thetan being a spirit. You can visualize, you can think of yourself as gravity. This is a Qigong exercise where you just feel the gravity of your body. You feel the gravity of your body and you walk around all day feeling the gravity of your body. Now that is, of course, a meditation, a walking meditation. But there's also ways to integrate strong force and weak force into your daily function.
And then it's interesting because I'm very involved on a periphery level with the Keshe Foundation, and what's coming forth now with plasma energy and some of the devices that they're working on is this, they're made from gravitational and magnetic forces combined. And this is really carrying us into a new understanding of how to access the energy that surrounds us all the time. And I think we're in the baby stages of understanding it, but how exciting that you even have this in your material.
Well, yes, and it's going to be stepping up as I continue with the videos, because just to give you a hint, I have a teacher in Qigong that I arrived at through all of my investigation of Montauk, and I was able to recognize the value of this person. And I one time, I've seen him do stuff like this certainly more than once, but I once saw him completely drop another human being and had the guy collapse to the ground without touching him. It was the year before that I'd seen him have a big guy charging at him, and the guy just collapses.
That's very cool. I love it.
Well, what it is years later, I said, what was that you were using on him? I said, was that weak force, strong force, electromagnetic force? He says, all of them combined.
Nice. You know, I've firewalked many times. I used to put Tony Robbins on stage during the 80s and have broken boards with my bare hands. And we healed a broken arm that I had in a matter of 6 hours. The doctors wanted to do surgery and put pins in. And that was with something called body electronics. So I know in my life and my world, we've been playing with these supernatural energies for a long time. And
what I would say about that, and I want to say something about that, you know, walking on fire, and I've watched fire walkers, it's no different than putting your finger through a flame. This is not supernatural. That's physics. What it does for people is it builds up their confidence.
yes.
Now, my particular teacher, and his name is Roosevelt Gainey, and you can see his website, bodyenergetics.tv. But he was before he studied Taoist Qigong, which he learned from a master named C.C. Ling. And C.C. Ling was half Chinese and half Korean. And he learned a tradition that was never taught to men. It was only taught to women. And he learned it from his mother. And his mother taught it to him so he could deal with his father, who was abusive to him. The Korean father was abusive, and he never taught this in Chinese to Chinese, because Chinese have their own way of doing things and they teach it incorrectly. Mm. And the Chinese did not like him because he was half Korean, and the Koreans did not like him because he was half Chinese. So he taught my teacher, who is black, okay? And he had a full background in martial arts before he met C.C. Ling. And he used to do things like sleeping on nails, being on a bed of nails, hung by the neck and not dying. And he said all of these things, they were nothing compared to what he learned in Taoist Qigong. Because they were tricks. They were not really connecting to the basic physical forces of the universe. But we're digressing from what we're here to talk.
We are.
But this is part of the paradigm of the 21st century superhuman. Now, to get back to Romania, is it all begins for me, seemingly begins with me with David Anderson. There's actually an earlier precursor to all of this that I didn't recognize till years later. But David Anderson, when he meets with me, telling me that he's got this background, which you asked about, and in the U.S. Air Force, where he was assigned to work on the displacement of satellites in outer space. Every year, satellites would move away several meters. So if they continue to move away, they're not going to be accurate for such as the global positioning system, which has been around a lot longer than we've had access to it. But for whatever satellites are being monitored in outer space, they assigned him to work with these things. And he realized with his research that basically time and space could be altered or warped. And he began to research this, and the Air Force was not interested in his work. They dismissed it. They were dismissive of it. And so because they were not going to pursue this, and he wanted to pursue it, he realized that his ticket to researching this was outside of the realm of the US military, which gave him his start. So he went to the trouble to patent the algorithms, the formulas for affecting this warping of space and time. And he eventually got discharged through the Air Force, but with great difficulty, because as he was discharged and was approved to go, they wouldn't release him because they began to see value in what he was doing. So they wanted to keep him. But by that time, he'd already cleared to go, and he had to petition Senator J. Rockefeller from his native state of West Virginia, which is where he grew up.
Wow.
And he said that he got released through the help of Senator Rockefeller and was then a free person. And there was a great deal of interest in his work by the medical field because he had established that he could slow time down or speed it up. And if you can slow time down, this would deal with the preservation of organs. So if you wanted a liver to last longer, you could slow it down in time, and then you could take it back out and it wouldn't decay.
Wow.
So there was a lot of investment in his company, which it was private, was not on the stock exchanges, and it was called the Time Travel Research Center. It was basically a security company, and it was operating out of Hauppauge, Long Island, in an industrial park in Hauppauge, which is a town it's more or less midway between New York City and Montauk.
So he was actually kind of near you, and he ended up reading your book and then coming to one of your meetings.
Yes, this was a great oddity that he was near me at all.
Yeah.
Because I asked him, I said, why did you come to Long Island? Because he was from West Virginia. He had a research center in Valley Forge at one point. And then I don't know why. And I asked him, he says, I don't know why I came to Long Island. I don't know.
Synchronicities.
Well, certainly synchronicity. He might have had other reasons that he couldn't talk about. But he was here for quite a few years. And so in any case, he was interested in what I was doing. And he was very impressed by the presentation I gave the subject in the book, The Montauk Project, the way I presented it. Because in that book, I'm not the scientist, I'm the writer, and I'm presenting it so people, common people, will understand it.
Nice.
Now, so in any case, when he saw me on this fated day, August 11th, 1999, he had just returned from Romania, where he had been, prior to being in Romania, he had been in Germany doing business, whatever business he was doing. And they asked him, one of his colleagues there asked him at the last minute, I can't make it. I'm supposed to be a speaker at this camp in Romania. Could you please take my place?
Wow.
So David takes his place and he flies to Romania, to Bucharest, where he's taken on a 2-hour drive to the southeast of Romania, to near the ancient ruins of Capidava. These are ancient ruins, the ancient civilization that are attributed to be Roman, but they're not Roman ruins. There's so much ruins there that it goes back far beyond the days of Rome. The problem is it would cost so much to excavate it. You'd have to dig up the entire town with a tremendous amount of money. It's not going to be done. It's a tunneled city, but this is where the camp is. But the camp is not actually on the ruins. You can see the ruins from the camp. It's in the middle of the Danube River on an island. And an island that is a protected biosphere from UNESCO, and it does attract, one part of the island attracts fishermen throughout the year, and the other part of the island in the first couple weeks or first week of August is a camp called Atlanticron. Atlanticron, which sort of stands for Time of Atlantis, Cron meaning time, Atlantis. It was the brainchild of a man named Serene Rapanovich, who grew up fishing there with his father. He would fish on the island, and then eventually he said, someday I'd like to do something on this island and have people gather here. This began with science fiction camps where his friends would camp out and they would talk about science fiction and they would read science fiction and have discussions. Now, because Serene became involved professionally, and this was during the communist era in the government, and he transitioned from the communist reign, which was ended in 1989, into the capitalist part of the government, the transition. And he now has full government support for this camp, and it grew into a real academic camp where you will get some of the best students from Romania, most brilliant students, and people in America don't understand how brilliant the young people in Romania are. And this, of course, was great interest to David because he needed mathematics for his time travel research center. And he was able to establish a time travel research center in Romania where he would hire mathematicians because they were the best mathematicians in the world. Some of them, they were known for that. And so in any case, this is a camp that features artists, writers, and scientists. What were you going to ask me?
I would love to just do screen sharing for 1 second and show a map of Romania. I just pulled one up because whenever you start talking about it, my mind goes, okay, what's surrounding it? And would that work for you if I just do that?
Good idea.
All right. Give me 1 second here. And we'll get this pulled up and you can give us your...
Okay, now if you look at, you'll see down towards the bottom of the country is Bucharest. That's the capital of the city, which was founded by Vlad Tepes. People know him as Dracula. He founded that city.
Wow.
And then if you look over, the only other city in the south is Constanta. That's on the Black Sea. That is a resort.
Okay, I see that over here.
It's a resort where you can go and go onto the beach, and many Romanians will vacation there. Now, this camp is not far from Constanta. It's about 40 minutes by car from Constanta inland, and the river kind of goes up and around, so you don't really see it there. But while we're looking at Romania, if you look at this dark green mountains, they're mountains. They start, yes, they start in the north and they come all the way.
Okay.
Now, if you go about to where the A is in Romania,
yep,
and you go into this area, this is where the Sphinx is.
Okay.
And not far from there, a little bit to the north, is where the Polinari Fortress is. The Polinari Fortress is the actual fortress that Count Dracula built, and it's the transition point between the province of Wallachia and Transylvania. Now, Transylvania is sandwiched in that green area. It's surrounded by all those green mountains.
Okay.
Now, yes, down in there, yes, in that area. That's Transylvania.
Okay.
Now, that was sandwiched in by these mountains, and it was protected during the Ice Age.
Wow.
So in any case...
Yeah, the history you told me on this is so interesting. I don't know if you want to...
We will indulge in the history at the appropriate time.
Great, because it's
all of this is sort of the introduction of how I became involved in Romania, and it was over a long period of time.
Okay.
Now, see, I first learned of this in 1999. I had a dream in 1989 that was a precursor to all of this, and this is the part of the fifth book. We won't go into that dream right now, but...
Should we go ahead and let this map go, or do you want to stay?
Well, let's keep that map there.
Okay.
For at least a while.
These countries have changed over time, so I never,
Well, let me just point thing out, since we're looking at this historically.
Okay.
If you look to the left of Romania, you will see Hungary.
Yep.
Okay. And if you see that Hungary extends into those mountain area, and Transylvania was a part of Hungary up until the 1800s, the late 1800s.
Okay.
It was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire.
Nice.
So they owned it, and Romania was formed as a country in the late 1800s after the Crimean War, and it sort of got all the people that spoke Romanian in one geographical area.
Okay.
In actual fact, the purpose of which was to isolate them. And to isolate their culture and cut it off, because it is, in many, if not all respects, the mother culture.
Interesting.
And their language is the precursors to their language is the mother language. And this is a whole story. So there has been a political effort to isolate Romania and ignore it and dumb people down on the subject of Romania. Now, David was going to this camp to lecture on time travel, which he did. But when he arrived there, he was very touched and very enamored of what he saw and all these people learning, and then of course he was also very interested in the science that these people were able to contribute to him. So he immediately started setting up a time travel research center, and this caught the eye of the Romanian government. Now,
and did he do that through the camp or independently of the camp?
I don't know.
Okay.
But it probably was with the camp, probably.
Right.
I've never really asked him that.
Right.
And I'm sure he would tell me. But the whole point was he attracted a lot of attention. Now, the one thing is you don't realize in America, we think that we have Big Brother watching us in America.
Right.
It's nothing. The cameras in the UK that watch you on the street corners, those are nothing compared to what goes on in Romania, traditionally. Because Romania was a communist country, and they had spy technology down. And even to this day, like, they don't use checks in Romania. Like, we write a check.
Uh-huh.
They do have that capacity, but nobody uses them. It's a completely different culture, and the bureaucracy is thicker. And I've been told by Romanians it's thicker than any country in the world.
Wow.
So this all goes back to the communist tradition, and it's hard to move without being detected.
Wow.
Now, this is, so in any case, he came to the attention of the government very fast. And they wanted to know, what on earth is this American, or perhaps what in the hell is this American doing hiring these people in Romania? This and a lot of their patterns are built in from the communist days.
Right.
For example, a friend of mine who was teaching in Constanța, in the city there, she would had to leave because she would get bawled out by her superior, who would bawl her out in front of the class as if this was communist times. Mm. And you know, there was no room for it because the students loved her. They hated him. So you see that there's some parts of the culture that are still suffering from the inbred factors of communist Romania. So in any case, he attracted the attention, and the man I told you who runs this camp, Serene Rapanovich, who was at that time working in nuclear security, he is now the head of nuclear security in Romania. He came to David's side and said, and told the government, this guy's okay, let him do what he's doing, and he vouched for him. So Serene's words went a lot of way towards stabilizing David's friendly relations with the country of Romania. Interesting. So now because Serene is in, well, that gets into another story, because he's in charge of security with nuclear energy. This has always intrigued me as for the energy that David has to bring with his time travel technology, because it can supply the world with virtually free energy. Interesting. That's another story, and we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay. So in any case, but the association of the two men is interesting alone from that perspective. Now, David he'd set up an operation in Romania, and then he had fortified it with this alliance with Serene. And then he came back to home on Long Island. And practically the first thing he did was go to this meeting and meet me. It was like I was right on his destiny path. Interesting. Yes, and we didn't really realize the full significance, but he was very intent on getting me to Romania. He says, you'd like Romania. There's this woman I want you to meet in Romania. And I refer to her as the Madame Blavatsky of Romania. She's really not like Madame Blavatsky, but she has a great wisdom about her. Mm. So he wanted me to meet this woman, and eventually I did, but that was many years later. In any case, he comes back and he meets me, and he says that he wants to work with me. So we had this lunch, and he told me what I told you about time travel and whatnot, and that he had this basically what I call a low-grade machine, what he called a time reactor, where he could slow down time or speed it up. And this was the size of a soccer ball, he said. He says, you know, we want to make it bigger, but we're still working on it. So in any case, he would talk to me now and then, write me, email me, but I considered his work of such importance because it was like, we're talking about the size of a soccer ball, that I put it on page 3 of my newsletter. I didn't put it on the front page. I put it on page 3 because I figure he's doing something and it's very important and it's very significant, but he's at a junior grade compared to what I'd been talking about and dealing with at Montauk, which was like, you know, throwing ships from one harbor to another and this sort of thing. But in any case, I was very interested in his work, and he eventually came over to my house and he set up my first website. He did it all. He was very savvy with the net when it came online, and he says, you should have a website. He set up my first website. He even hosted it on his server.
How nice.
Yes. And
so it just meant he thought your work was really important and it somehow allied with his.
Oh, yes, most definitely. And he saw a kindred spirit.
Yes.
Now, everybody wants to do time travel. I never really had a goal to do time travel. This is sounds kind of odd, but it was the horizon of the consciousness pursuing the most fundamental roots of existence. And that's what led me to time travel. And of course, I'm interested in it. But I never had this great desire to travel in time. And it just wasn't a desire. To me, it's more of a curiosity. And I certainly would not be the first one to jump in the time reactor, which is now full size. Humans can go in it now. And people have been in it. I have not. Okay. But I certainly wouldn't want to be the first one. I'd want to see if it worked well first before I went on any sort of adventure. But in any case, David was in my life, but he would kind of flow in and flow out. And he was mysterious. But I met him in 1999 in August. It was in 2001, after 9/11, that he came back and had a very, I guess what you'd say, fleeting but significant presence in my life. It was in November, not too long before Thanksgiving, and he asked if I would be so kind as to come and visit him in his apartment in Kings Park, New York, which is on the North Shore of Long Island. And if I would, well, he had 2 agendas there. Now, the first agenda I knew because he'd already talked about it with me. He wanted to do an event on time travel. And his connections were such that he could bring almost the entire Eastern Seaboard University intelligentsia to come to this event. But he didn't want to limit it to just that. He wanted to have people from all disciplines, including metaphysics, there. And he says, I would like you and Preston Nichols to be at this event. And I said, oh, well, that's fine. We can arrange that. He had a secretary at the time, and he was going to arrange all this publicity for it. And then,
to be clear, Preston Nichols was your co-author.
That's correct. That's correct.
On the Montauk books.
Yes, who he knows. So he always took more of an interest in me, though, because I'm the writing messenger factor. Okay, he wasn't trying to learn science from Preston. He respected Preston, but the science that the 2 of them were doing were completely different.
Interesting.
It's sort of like soccer and rugby, or football and rugby. They're similar, but they're different, and the rules are different. There's similar rules, and you know they're just different. So in any case, he said that And then something very curious happened while I was having dinner with him. Somehow he mentioned China. And I mentioned how odd the Chinese were in respect of their greeting cards. I said, I met these Chinese in 1992 at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And out of all the countries I was trying to interest in my book, they were the only ones that showed a market interest. The rest of the countries would be, it didn't register. But the Chinese were like, wow. And several years later, I got a card from them for New Year's. And they sent me a card, and I said, oh, I recognize them. This is odd. They send me a card out of the blue. Why? I never heard from them again. But the significance of that card is that I said, David, this is odd. They send a card years later, and why do they send a card? They don't communicate. They just send a card. He says, I have a Christmas card from China. Yeah. Let me show you. And he takes me over to, it was a fireplace. He didn't use the fireplace, but there was a mantle on it. And he shows me a card, and it was from the president of China.
Wow.
And then he showed me his other cards. And this was from the year previous. And they were all from like heads of state, including Colonel Gaddafi. Wow. And they were all addressed to the Time Travel Research Center. Mm. And he was known by every head of state you could imagine, at least in official capacity. And he told me that he often had occasion to talk to heads of state by reason of his expertise in nuclear weapons. Mm. Now, I don't know why heads of state want to talk to somebody about nuclear weapons, other than maybe get educated and know what can and can't be done with them. But he said that these heads of state are often portrayed as negative people, but he says most of them are beside themselves as to how they got in that position, and they're coping madly trying to do the right thing. Not doing too much harm. And he says he had a great deal of sympathy because they felt overwhelmed by all of their responsibilities.
Nice. That's a really nice piece of information.
Well, it's a nice piece of information, and you have to look at both sides of the coin. They often are heralded with a lot of negativity, and sometimes it's very much deserved, and there's sometimes not. So one cannot polarize either way. But in any case, he said to me, he says, the other reason I want you to be here, other than the event, is that the real reason is that I have been given orders to show up and a plane ticket to go to Moscow. He says, now this is after 9/11, when the United States had invaded Afghanistan. Mm. And I said, okay. And he said, they showed me to show up with only my passport and my plane ticket. He says, don't bring anything else because you won't be able to take it with you. He says, I do not know why they want me to go there. And I'm not, he says, once you're in the military, you're always in the military. They can call on you at any time. Mm-hmm. And this is what was happening. Now, he says, they told me I'd be coming back in 2 weeks. Now, if anybody's had experience with the military, they tell you 2 weeks, don't buy that, okay? It might mean 2 years. It might mean 2 months. It's not 2 weeks.
Nice he was telling you, good to have the buddy system.
Well, he said, if I don't come back in 2 weeks, I want you to raise a fuss. He says, and I'm thinking that I don't know what fuss I can raise. I have a newsletter that goes to a few hundred people. I mean, what's this going to do?
Right.
He says, but you're the only, just make noise. And I said, okay. So after 2 weeks, he says, I don't have a good feeling about this convention. So in any case, 2 weeks went by. Nothing happened. I did nothing. So 2 weeks, all right. Let's see what goes. I'm not going to jump because it's not 2 weeks. And besides, what can I do anyway? I'm going to say, he's missing, he's gone. Well, he might just as easily turn up. After 3 weeks went by, I got a phone call from a lady friend of his. And she says, David says if he's not back in 3 weeks to call you. So he had a kind of a ping pong system set up.
Cool.
And I begin to talk to her. I begin to, and I said, and I had a big deja vu of talking to her. I haven't spoken to this woman in a couple of years, but if we were to talk, we would be like really good friends because of the strange way in which we met. So we agreed to meet at a restaurant and talk about this. And this was very funny because we had a conversation. We agreed to meet. We were both friends of David. And so we meet and we start talking, and I start telling her about David, and she goes, he has a time travel research center? I didn't know anything about this.
Wow.
And she's shocked. That shows how close his friends don't necessarily. Now, there was
and it shows how much he confided in you as well, because you were kind of...
Well, yes, and in other words, what's on a need to know? She met him in a gym, a workout gym in Syosset, where he was friends with the head of the gym, who had once been the head of the New York State Boxing Commission. Mm-hmm. So David had helped either sponsor or promote some Romanian boxers. He was involved in kickboxing himself.
Interesting.
So, he has an athletic background, and of course, and she met him at the gymnasium, and they became, very good friends. So but I don't think that the guy who was the president of the gym knew about David's time travel stuff. I don't. Now, David as a kickboxer, he was a professional champion kickboxer who would come to Atlanticron. The man's name is Dan Lucas, and very nice man. And we were, so I met him, and I had to kind of like, we had to make our schedules respective of each other, because I was teaching Qigong and he was teaching kickboxing. So, you don't want them to conflict. And he was so lovely and so courteous to me. And anyway, so we're talking, and, he's listening to me talk, and he had no idea that David was involved in time travel. He knew him as a kickboxer from a gym in Rochester. So this was very funny. So David has these are great friends of his. They don't necessarily know. And of course he learned about,
So you went and met with the woman
yes.
when he hadn't come back after 3 weeks after 9/11, and then what happened?
Well, as soon as I heard from the woman, I began raising whatever fuss I could, but it was on the phone. I began making an issue of the fact that David was not back once she called me. And so within a very short period of time, when we were going through all this commotion, he sent us an email. And the email was addressed to me, her, and the head of the gym. Said, I just want you to know that I'm okay. Everything's fine, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Don't worry about it.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. But I did something, is I was able to trace the email with the help of a friend of mine, Joseph Matheny, who was expert in all things computer. And he says this email was sent out of a server in Pakistan.
Wow.
Which tells me that he could have been part of the war effort in Afghanistan. And he might have been part of a war effort that had to do with stuff that was senior to conventional military. Mm-hmm. I really don't know. And I certainly later asked him about it. And to this day, even to this day, he will not tell me what he was doing on that trip. He won't say he was in Pakistan. Now, he could have been in Afghanistan and it was relayed through Pakistan. He could have been in Pakistan. He could have been in India. Somehow the server came out of Pakistan, and he was in that part of the world most likely. On that trip, he did eventually tell me, he would say that he was in Moscow, and I think we did receive another email from him from Moscow, and he did have an opportunity to purchase assets from the Moscow Aviation Institute. Now, the Moscow Aviation Institute was the place. I mean, that was where the astronauts came out of, or the cosmonauts, rather, in Russia. That was the premier, like that was their NASA, so to speak, the Aviation Institute. But it was more than just cosmonauts. And he purchased some of those assets after the fall of the Soviet Union. So
interesting. So he's a pretty sophisticated guy that got you involved in Romania and connected you on time travel.
No question. Now, okay, so this is 2001. And he comes back in January. He's been gone about 2 months, at least 6 weeks. And he calls me up on the phone and he says, I want to thank you for doing what you did. I really appreciate it, and I just want to thank you. Now, that was pretty much the last conversation I would have with him for a very long time. What happened is that the Time Travel Research Center at that point began to be attacked. In other words, the industrial park in Hauppauge, it would be ransacked. And then he had to move the location, and it would be ransacked again. Now, keep in mind, he was in a security department. He was security, and his own security was being compromised. Now, I'm also going to say something else. I'm going to go back in time to 9/11. At 9/11, right before the week of 9/11, Serene Rapanovich, the man who founded the camp in Atlanticron and who is now the head of nuclear security, was coming to America. He comes to America frequently. I don't frequently, but now and then. He also visits Russia now and then, because he speaks Russian, he speaks English. But he was coming to America. He arrived in America, and he was supposed to visit the Time Travel Research Center on Long Island. He was actually going to visit it. But as soon as 9/11 happened, there was an order that no foreign nationals would be allowed. That was ordered from the government. So David could not allow him to see it. This was unfortunate. So I find this out years later as well, after knowing people. But what happened is that the Time Travel Research Center was attacked, and then the government came to him and said, well, you're having problems. Well, if you let us partner with you, we'll help your security. We'll do security for you, and we'll save you the security. Just let us be partners. Now, to me, this is like, the fox arranging to be in charge of the hens, the chicken coop.
Right.
It's like, well, they probably sent in the people to mess up the security and then say, well, we'll save you from this problem. In any case, as he would later tell me, it's hard to say what the actuality, he was either forced out of the time travel business or he chose to depart. But in another case, he left the scene. He dissolved what was going on in Long Island. And part of this dissolution, and he went up to Rochester, New York, and worked for a company called Bosch, B-O-S-C-H. They are a big military defense contractor. They make a lot of tools. And in Bosch, he was like a vice president of some sort, but he was basically in charge of biosensing, biometric devices. So like stuff that could read your eye and you could, get through security that way. Biometric devices he was researching.
Interesting.
I always assumed he was interested in doing that to increase the security of his own operation. That's what I thought he was doing it for. But he worked, and so that was, and sometimes he would invite some of his friends from Rochester to the camp. I would eventually meet them and hear different stories of what happened. And
Peter, I'd love to toss a couple thoughts in here. We're really covering a big map here of information on, I think, some of the complexity of what becomes involved when we start talking about time travel. And some of what I've been exposed to has been, like supposedly in the US, some trillions of dollars disappeared and blah, blah, blah. But what seems to be behind a lot of that is some of the weapons war in space and having to utilize time travel, I think, has been played with by governments in the last however many years. I mean, I think we're talking about some pretty sophisticated level stuff that's been going on behind the scenes that maybe a lot of us as regular citizens might not be super excited about. I mean, I don't know that we want to see, weaponry involved with time travel in the military and all that. However, it's probably part of what is actually going on with all of this.
well, this is part of the expansion of consciousness. Now, where I'm talking to you at is from the viewpoint, that we're citizens on this planet and we're on the inside looking out and we're trying to get out. In actual fact, there's all sorts of time travelers that have been around since the history of time. We just don't see them. Okay,
Nice.
We're not trafficking with them. And that's a whole nother paradigm
Right.
that humanity is not quite ready for.
Right.
So it's just like the story of some science fiction story where somebody lives in or like one of these cargo cults that you would have in the South Pacific, where they would have the soldiers come in an airplane and they think they were God. And these people on an island have never gone out and they've never seen America, they've never seen Japan, they've never seen civilization. So when you put a person like that, he can grow up in the civilization of Japan or America and he can become civilized. But in their isolation, and we are isolated because our consciousness is limited and we do not use part of our brain, our whole way of living and being is isolated to 21st century schizoid culture, which is the McDonald's Burger King culture,
Right.
The NFL football, and everything else you can imagine that we are inundated with on a day-to-day basis.
And I call that the 3D culture, as opposed to
Amazon.com, Cineplex, Netflix, all this stuff is the culture as we know it. But we have to look at this culture, as advanced as it is from a cargo cult. We are also in the Stone Ages from a more advanced sort of 21st century superhuman.
Right.
So, in any case,
I'd love to go on a loop from all this back to all this exciting stuff that's in Romania that you got.
Well, I'm going to get there because we've digressed onto, but this is all of the lead up.
That kind of backstory.
This is all the lead up.
Great.
And it's a long, slow process.
You're a great storyteller. I love it.
Okay. Well, however, what happens basically in the meantime, he's up in Rochester and he calls me in the year 2003 and he says, he says, I've got all this stuff from the research center. I got to get rid of it. I don't need it anymore.
Wow.
I don't know what to do with it. He says, you're the best person for it. I'll tell you what, I'll meet you halfway. If you can get something like a station wagon, can we meet halfway and you can take it all?
Wow.
I'm not going to need it. And I said, okay. And I jump at the chance and I'm thinking like, well, I don't have a station wagon. I have a Ford Taurus at the time. And I said, but you know what? Preston Nichols has a van. And at that time, Preston Nichols is living on Long Island. And I said, let me see if I can use Preston's van. And Preston is all up for it. He says he will drive with me up, and we're going to go all the way to Rochester. We're going to drive up 8.5, 9 hours to Rochester. So we drive up there all day. It's a Saturday, the day before Easter, and we meet David in some parking lot that he picked, and it takes us about 15 or 20 minutes to take all these boxes from David's Hummer and put them, all three of us are working to put them into Preston's van. They all fit. I don't even know what's in them. And I said, David, we'd like to take you out to dinner. And he says, oh, I'm sorry. He says, I don't have that luxury. So he talks around for 15 minutes. And he says, look,
Surprised there weren't black helicopters flying over your head.
no, but that's another story. But anyway, he said, remind me about the black helicopters when we get to Romania. But in any case,
Okay.
he says, I got to tell you something. I'm not going to be able to work with you for 5 more years. I'm not happy about it, but I can't work for you for another 5 years. Either one of you. I said, okay, well, we're sorry. And we said goodbye. And it was like too little of David Anderson. Drive all that way. I was hoping to hear more. But we came away with the goods. And this,
He obviously had signed some non-disclosure agreement, I would guess.
I don't know if he signed a non-disclosure. I think he knows when to mind his P's and Q's.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I don't think he's
I'm sure you're right.
so much. He knows when to shut up and when not to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, there are so many sub-stories that went on from that because on the way back, it's Easter Sunday. And I said, oh, Preston, we're not far from where Joseph Smith picked up the golden tablets according to the Mormon religion. I want to go.
Wow.
And he says, okay. So this gets into such a side story, and I can't tell it all, but basically, Preston Nichols, I'll just do the highlights. I won't tell the whole story.
And that happened in New York?
Yes, in upstate New York.
Wow. And so that's a really high frequency, energetic area, correct, from what you've said before?
Rochester?
Well, I know Montauk was.
Montauk and Rochester are way far apart.
Okay.
I mean, it's like California and San Francisco. It's even further apart.
All right.
I mean, LA and San Francisco,
Right.
much further apart.
We're talking Eastern and Western New York.
Extreme northeast New York is Rochester.
Okay.
Buffalo is more northwestern New York.
Right.
Montauk is as far southeast as you can get,
Okay.
and it's on an island. So they're very far
That's
apart.
where Joseph Smith found the tablets? Oh my gosh.
In Rochester, near Rochester, in a place called Camorra Hill. It's between Rochester and Syracuse.
I had read about that, but didn't realize that's where it was.
Oh, yeah. So in any case, as we're turning off, I'm looking for the turnoff, and Preston says, I think you better turn right here. He knew the area. And the reason he knew the area, and I found out this through another association from a former Mormon, True Ott, who used to say he could never understand. They had the biggest pageants in the world at this. They reenact the history according to the Latter-day Saints. People in costumes. And he said they always used to bring this weird equipment up there from Brookhaven Labs. It had Brookhaven Labs written on it, and it would change the weather. The weather was always good for these pageants. He says, I never understood how we could never have bad weather. And he told me the name of the doctor. The guy's name was Dr. So-and-so, I forget his name, who used to control all this equipment because it was very sophisticated. And so I asked Preston, I said, have you ever heard of this Dr. So-and-so? This is, a year later. He says, oh yeah, he worked at Brookhaven Labs. He wasn't a doctor. They call him doctor, but he wasn't a doctor. And he said he had all this equipment, and Preston goes, I know about the equipment. I go, how do you know? He says, because I'm the one who designed it. I taught him how to use it.
Wow.
So this was to change the weather. So anyway, Preston had apparently been there before. And anyway, I got there, and it was Easter Sunday. There was not a soul on the property. They had a big, huge visiting center. They had the statue of the angel Moroni, where where the tablets were given to Joseph Smith. So anyway, we proceeded to go back home to Long Island, and on the way home, we stopped in Cairo, New York, which the natives like to call Cairo. It's spelled just like Cairo, Egypt. And he was buying a piece of property there. He was in escrow for this property because he was moving from Long Island. There's a lot of mystery around this property. It's where he lives today. And when he showed me the property, it wasn't his yet. And when he got home, he found out that the Mormons were trying to buy it out from under him. It was as if we were being tracked. And they couldn't break the contract. And it turned out that the property he purchased was one of the most important Masonic lodges in the country, and certainly the most important Masonic lodge in New York, and most of the presidents visited there.
Wow.
That's a piece of property Preston bought, which is in, nowhere near the condition it would have been at one time. So in any case, that was some of there was all sorts of side intrigue to all of this. But in any case, I got home, opened up the boxes, and most of them were books. I had the comic book collection. I had certain other the DVD he produced, Journeys into Time, I was able to resurrect that. And because it was out of print and whatnot, and some of his audio interviews that he'd done. Most of it was books, however, and those are to this day in my attic. Books, science books. Not exclusively science books, but artwork and whatnot. And correspondence, including the envelopes to all the world leaders. You know, I actually saw the envelopes from the world leaders and all of this sort of thing. But not the cards themselves. They seem to have been maybe a card or two. But in any case, that was that. And I did not, in the meantime, I didn't hear from him. I got a manuscript sent to me in about 2004, and it was from my Romanian publisher. And I have a Romanian publisher who had published the Montauk Project book in Romanian. And he, in turn, sent me this book, which is now this book. And he said, he translated it into English. He said, would you like to publish this book? Well, this book sat on my desk for 4 years because I didn't have time to read it. And finally, when a friend of mine was visiting me and he read it, he says, you've got to publish this book. Well, this was 2007. 2007. I read the book in November, December, finished it and started negotiations with Sorin Hormuz in Bucharest to publish the book. By the time we completed the negotiations, it was April. And it was 5 years to the week when I met with David. 5 years to the week. And I get an email from David saying, how would you like to go to Romania in the summertime?
Interesting. Can you hold the book up one more time, Peter?
Transylvanian Sunrise.
And so it's in English and in Romanian.
Yes.
And that's written by someone other than you, or?
It's written by an author, Radu Cinamar, and with Peter Moon. Now, I begin the book by writing about my adventures with David Anderson. That's how it starts.
Nice.
So you know how I got involved in this. And then after I go to Romania in 2008, I am going there. And of course, I have a long talk with David before I go. He's preparing me. He's purchasing my tickets for me. This is a all expense paid trip with me and another individual I'm allowed to take. I'm being taken there.
And it's interesting. It's exactly 5 years later.
Exactly. And of course, when I got there, I asked him, he says, I don't know. He says, I'm good. He says, I'm not always that good. But in other words, it's just like, it's going to be he could have said it's going to be a long time, but he said 5 years. He was right to the money. It was a coincidence.
So I want you to tell us about the Romanian language too, whenever it fits.
Well, that'll come later. But
okay.
In any case, I was supposed to get a 3-day cultural tour of Romania. So I talked to him for a long time, and I said, well, he says, what do you want to do in your Romania? I said, I want to see what's in this book. I mean, I want to see there's a mysterious holographic hall of records underneath the Sphinx. I'd like to see that. Now, that's what this book is about, this holographic hall of records. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And so anyway, he says, he writes it down on his notepad. I mean, I can't see him doing that, but I know he's writing it down, all the things I want to do. That was the main thing. And so he writes to his contacts in the government, and all of them refer him back to the publisher. And he says, no, it's the best we can do. I'm sorry, I can't do it. So in any case, I said, well, do you know who this guy is? Have you heard of it? He said, I know who you're talking about. I said, well, what do you know about it? He says, I don't want to talk about that on the phone. He says, I'm more comfortable talking about it in Romania. There's too many people listening in the United States. So I was set with the intrigue of learning more. Now, it's now appropriate that I go into this story. Now, this story is happening simultaneous to my adventures with David Anderson, and there's no necessary correlation between the two, except for me. I'm the correlation between the two because these are my two connections to Romania. One is David, who's taking me there physically, making sure that I get there physically. And this is a book, which is, the beginning of the book is about a man who was born in the 70s. And his name is Cesar Brad. We would call him Caesar Brad. And he is born with a huge umbilical cord. Now, a huge umbilical cord is an oddity.
Interesting.
And, yes, and it's such an oddity that when he was born, he was brought to the attention of the Romanian Securitate, or security, the intelligence. And because the doctors are in this bureaucratic big brother society are said, you know, anything that's strange, you let us know.
Interesting.
So security comes down to investigate, and they soon bring another man to investigate, who is Asian. And he's known as Dr. Zen, X-I-E-N, Dr. Zen.
Wow.
And Dr. Zen is the head of their paranormal department. He investigates the baby, he looks at the baby, and basically he arranges for the baby to come back and study with him at the age of 3.
I'm getting chills.
And the parents are paid off to report. They make a financial arrangement with the parents that they will be paid a certain sum to report on the baby, keep in touch with the baby, and, you know, they
Wow.
hired the parents as spies, so to speak. And the mother was a mother. The father, you know, he was a little, you know, too eager to get the money. And of course, this was Romania, communist Romania.
Interesting.
The boy is being tutored by this Chinese doctor. And this doctor of the paranormal, he set up their paranormal department in Romania, which they called Department Zero. He had a reputation for the paranormal department in China, and he was known for his acumen in this area.
I hate to ask, I wonder if it has anything to do with the dragon families. Or is that just a...
You might say the dragon families might have more to do with him than the other way around.
Okay.
And that you see, Romania is all based upon the dragon.
Right.
Dragon energies, you'll see that mountain. If I were to show you a certain highlight of that mountain range we looked at earlier, and we're not doing video stuff here, you could see how Romania mountains are shaped like a dragon.
Interesting.
And many things in Romania are dragon oriented.
Interesting.
Dracula's father was part of the Order of the Dragon. Now, the dragons are both white and black, positive and negative. Dragons are part of the spiraling energy that this universe is formed upon. It is ludicrous to think that dragons are all negative or dark.
And again, I think you mentioned the DNA along with that at one point, didn't you? Or that spiraling.
Well, yes, the DNA is all based upon spirals.
Right.
So in any case, dragons are, the archetype of the dragon is a part of it.
Nice.
But in any case, and it often gets twisted and convoluted into a negative vibration.
Right.
And certainly there are negative vibrations associated with dragons. But in any case,
And positive.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
But okay, so this Dr. Zen was a mysterious character, a delightfully mysterious character. And the main flaw with this book is that there's not enough about Dr. Zen in it. He's just mentioned. He's a bit character. We learned more about him in the subsequent books. But in this book, he's tutoring Caesar to become, to develop his superhuman abilities. Caesar is a superhuman, okay? He has psychic ability. He can see things. He predicts an ant's death when he's just a young man, 11 or 12.
Wow.
Nobody pays attention to him. She shouldn't be on that train. She gets on the train. He's killed. And, you know, and basically when he becomes a teenager, he is taken into Department Zero to be there and work there and cultivate his abilities.
Interesting.
And he eventually grows up to be the head of Department Zero. Interesting. So he has,
chills.
Yeah, oh, it's a fascinating, fascinating story. And of course, as my subsequent correspondence, Now, the average person's reading this book, and they get chills. Wow, this is neat. Now, I'm reading this book just like you are. The only difference is I'm a publisher, and you're a publisher too. But I'm saying is I'm a publisher of this book, so I'm going to, wow, I'm a publisher, but I'm also, correspond with the author, and I learned that this Caesar guy, he knows who I am. That's kind of neat. It's like, well, he knows who I am. He knows I exist. But you don't always get the feeling when you're reading a book and the most intriguing character in the book knows who you are.
Right.
Not when I first read it, he didn't know who I was, but he would eventually learn. And so again, I'm being watched from the psychic big brother, not in a negative sense.
Right. But somebody who's got some pretty paranormal abilities.
Well, yes. And in any case, this story goes very deep, because, and far deeper than one can imagine. Because, and then that part of the book, as he grows up and learns to be involved first with Department Zero and eventually the head of it, he is approached one day by an Italian Freemason who actually speaks impeccable Romanian, and he talks to him. He wants to talk to him on a card table outside of, away from any surveillance possibility. And he tells Caesar that the Pentagon in the United States has discovered a chamber beneath the Sphinx. And they can't find out what's in the chamber. They can't read from, they just know that there's a chamber there. There's a place they cannot access with ground penetrating radar from it's operated from satellites, and we want to know what's in there. Of course, he's a Freemason, and this is all told to him by his Freemasonic connections in the Pentagon.
And this is?
His name is Signor Mazzini.
Interesting.
Mazzini, not Menzini, but Mazzini.
Wow.
And so there's a famous Mazzini who was the head of the Illuminati. He was the successor to Adam Weishaupt. Giuseppe Mazzini. This is Mazzini. And they could well be related. However, Mazzini is basically, Caesar is very struck by the fact that Mazzini even knows who Caesar is and knows what his job is, because there are only at least 2 or 3 people who even know about his job. One is the president of Romania. One is his own superior, General Abadia. And I think the head of Romanian security knows who he is. So he's extremely impressed that this guy even knows who he is and isolates him to talk about it. And that because he's in charge of Department Zero, he knows that he has to go through this person to do this access project of the Sphinx. He says, but we want to get at it, and we want to bring the Americans over, and they will use their atomic lasers to penetrate this chamber, because, and it all has to be done with the top echelon of security. The president of Romania is not going to know about it. The president of America, which is George W. Bush, is not going to know about it. And anyway, Caesar does not like this man. He knows that he is suspicious. He knows that his motives are bad. This man even talks about the potential Caesar has if he joins his side, to give him great material power. But Caesar also knows that if he does not cooperate with this man, that he will likely be taken from his position. So he has to dance on a dandelion. He has to dance, and he has to play this man. He has to indulge him without endorsing him.
Interesting. Peter,
Yes.
Can I just interject something I want to keep you on track here too, because it's so exciting.
I'm on track.
There's a certain point, and this happened in our last video as well, where it happened about the top of the hour here, where I start hearing kind of a really mild feedback on your voice. And I know it's because of the energies coming through. It's not a technical thing. And I start having waves of nausea going through me. I don't know if nausea is a good word, but I can feel these waves of energy. And I'm getting the level at which this story is coming through at. And I just want to thank you for sharing it with us. It's really,
well, you're allowing it to be shared on a very high level.
yeah.
I'm not always to, I flow very nicely with you. So we're going to have to come back again.
Yeah, definitely.
Because
I'm really open to the level of what you're bringing through, because I believe this is critical to us in our consciousness of getting the kind of level of what we're beginning to understand on the planet right now.
Well, yes, and you're getting a whole background story, whereas if one actually reads the book, it'll be completely different.
Right.
Because you're reading this story. I'm giving you the background to the story and sort of the tidbits of the story, the highlights. But it's the book is wow.
I've got just total goosebumps. So it's interesting because in Montauk, we had a connection between the Montauk Indians and Egypt and the Montauk pyramids. And then now here we are in Romania. And again, we're going back to under the Sphinx in Egypt, connecting the Romanian Sphinx with the Egyptian Sphinx.
And that comes into, we're getting ahead, but book 3 is about that connection between the two Sphinxes. The mystery of Egypt, where it connects the Romanian Sphinx to the Egyptian Sphinx by an underground tunnel. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So in any case, Caesar there's all of this political drama in this book. A lot of the book is political drama between Caesar, Mazzini, the Italian Freemason, and then the actual logistics of getting into the chamber. So they have an alliance of the Romanian army and the secret department of the Romanian army, which is a part of Department Zero. I don't know and then the American army that's there. And so then they have to set up this protocol between the two nations. Now, these two nations are not allies. This forms an alliance, and you will see it in the newspapers at the time where Romania joins NATO. Romania was never a part of NATO until this discovery in the Bucegi Mountains of 2003 during August, during the famous biorhythm that's associated with the Philadelphia Experiment and Montauk Project.
Interesting.
Yes, this is the lore of Philadelphia and Montauk becoming true in a new reference point. The next big moment will be in August of 2023.
Interesting.
That will be indeed a miraculous day. But in any case, so there's all this politics to open the chamber, and Caesar is needed. His biometrics are needed to open the chamber. It's as if some device that they have in a rock that he's able to put his hand into it, that it opens, because they can't open it. 3 people are sliced and diced. They go up in vapor.
I've heard about this. Interesting.
They try to get into the vapor. They get vaporized approaching this barrier, because there's a barrier they can't penetrate.
Right.
And so then and then once they penetrate the final penetration, they get this big tunnel. This is a big tunnel. So and the tunnel leads into eventually a chamber. They have to get golf carts or the equivalent thereof to get into this thing, because it's a long walk. And then when they get into the chamber, it's ancient. At that time, they guess it to be 50,000 years old. Now, which is the approximate age of what the Sphinx is deemed to be. But this...
so we're going to pre-Atlantis, basically.
Yes, for sure.
And a very advanced civilization.
Yes. Now, this particular book was written with only about 6 weeks of experience of investigating this chamber. Now, that was in 2003. So, I mean, this thing's been investigated for 12 years in the present time. So, in 2000, this is what that book's written with that much knowledge. Now, when they go into the chamber, they see they see tables that are about 6 feet high. So they have to get up on stools to be able to access them. And if you put your hand over a specific square on a table, it would do a holographic readout of the DNA in your hand.
Now, again, we're under the Sphinx in Romania or in Egypt? In Romania, okay.
And if you go closer to the table, it's going to give it, molecular versus atomic, and then closer is atomic.
Now, have you been there? Have you gotten to do that?
No.
Okay.
I have been to the Sphinx at least 3 or 4 times, but that's on the outside.
Okay.
But interesting things happen there for sure. But in any case, the author has been there. See, Caesar's the one who first discovers this, but he actually allows Radu to come in, visit it, and write about it. See, that's the purpose of Radu. Radu is...
oh, I'm getting chills. He's sort of a step-down transformer of that energy. So.
Radu is, yes.
Yeah.
And Caesar is more of the guy that's playing in the control room, who's allowed in the control room.
Yeah.
Sort of like, so in any case, this table has another capacity. There's other tables, and one capacity is that you can put your hand over a square and it'll read out, it'll show you the DNA of a particular life form from another planet. And with that planet, there will be a planet in a star system. So it will show you the star system that it comes from. This is visually. And if you put your hand simultaneously on another part of the table, it'll show a species from another planet with a star system, so you'll know where it's from. And when they're both on there at the same time, it will show a hybridization of the 2 life forms.
Wow.
So you could put a cat and a dog. You could put a giraffe and a mule. But these are from a different planet, so they're different life forms.
Nice.
So it's basically a data bank of DNA.
How
All possible permutations of DNA.
Wow.
So what you have to admire this book is that, I mean, this makes Noah's Ark look like, the story of Noah's Ark look like a metaphor in a 2-dimensional cartoon.
Yes.
It's not to be taken seriously.
That's right.
But this is a bigger paradigm, and it's a holographic paradigm.
And my thing that I've heard about Noah's Ark is it really was carrying genetic material through a time, or DNA, through a time of transition on Earth. But
you'll also find the whole story of Noah's Ark laid out in Egyptian hieroglyphics. The story is from Egypt.
Interesting.
So in any case, and all civilizations have stories of floods. Noah's Ark is not unique. But in any case, this chamber, which has all these incredible things inside of it, has what's called a projection hall, which the author is allowed to go in and it might last 45 minutes or an hour, not much longer than that. But he watches this projection of the history of the world. And he sees the past, and he says this hall of records where you can actually see the past in holographic form goes up to about 400 or 500 AD. They didn't know why it cut off at that point. And he sees the history of the world. But whoever sees the history of the world, who sits in this device or looks through this projection hall, which is a separate part of the chamber, he sees, it's bioresonant. What you see is different than what I see. There might see some similarities, but you might go look at Egypt and I might go look at China, or vice versa.
Wow, that's amazing.
Because you can only consolidate so much in a 45-minute viewing. And what if relative? It's kind of not unlike the idea of taking a hallucinogenic drug. What you're going to see is different than I see. But if we're both in the same room, we might start playing off each other.
Interesting.
Just like the holographic portions might, hybridize. It's like we're going to hybridize energies,
Right.
just in conversation and experience. And
Wow. So is there any chance we can get to do this?
well, I don't know. To answer your question, I can. But before I address that, the third. I have a spider coming down at me as I talk. Very interesting. Coming down from the ceiling, coming down to visit.
Cute. Weaving the web.
Well, yes. Now he's going back up. Smudging must have worked. So anyway.
The third.
so the perhaps the most intriguing part of this tunnel, or of this chamber, is there are 3 tunnels inside of it. One tunnel goes to Egypt, as I alluded to earlier. Another tunnel goes to Tibet. And on the way to Tibet, it's great food for the muse, you know.
That is amazing.
Yes. In Tibet, there is an offshoot of the tunnel that goes to Baghdad, or the area of Baghdad, where there's a similar installation to the one underneath the one in Romania. And when you get to Tibet, there's another offshoot that goes to an area in Mongolia where there's a similar installation, and one that eventually goes to Tibet itself where there's a similar installation. Now, the one in Iraq becomes a focal point of this story, and how the story comes, well, that becomes, and then there's a third tunnel that goes into the inner earth. That, of course, to me is the most intriguing. And I've gotten, my adventures into Romania, I've gotten a lot of insight into this third tunnel, although I've certainly never been in any of them.
Interesting.
At this point, I'd like to just take a quick break.
Okay. I'm going to just...
Can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Hi, and we're back. And what an exciting adventure we're on.
Well, yes, and one thing is we've been talking a lot about the backstory, and the story is certainly interesting. The backstory over time might turn out to be more important than the actual story. This occurred to me during the break we were having. But in any case...
the actual story is pretty exciting, too. We like the kind of woo-woo stuff.
Well, it's all exciting, but I'm just saying is that the backstory might actually, in the long run, prove to be the most significant. But I mean, I don't know that. Well, it certainly will be for me because it's my story. But for me, for sure. But in any case, because everything in life fits into a pattern. And so what I'm here in all of these adventures that I'm talking about is building up patterns. It's like building up an arsenal of color. Just like, you know, and that color is part of your mind and part of your creativity. And of course, all of these things that I'm digging up, all of these colors, so to speak, use a metaphor, are tied and tangential to reality. They're tied and they're tangential to science. So not everything is science, but it's all tied. It's tied to art, it's tied to science. Now, in any case, we're talking about this book, Transylvanian Sunrise, and I was mentioning the tunnel that goes off to the area of Baghdad. Well, according to this story, this was part of what the United States had dug up or found that Iraq was hiding.
Yeah.
And so in any case, the U.S. went in there, and this would have been, I think this would have been back around, I don't remember, that 2003 area.
I remember reading about it on some special news on the web. I remember reading about that being visited by, I don't know, Hillary Clinton or somebody.
Well, no, I don't think Hillary Clinton would have visited this site, but it was the tunnel, and it was being guarded by U.S. military troops. Well, it might have been visited by Hillary, except it would have been
some of our people. Anyway, I remember. Yeah, I remember.
This is the whole point: is that the United States military proper was guarding it, not the secret.
Right. What's really interesting, too, is hearing about the other end of it from you, because I remember this piece of news when it came across the pike, but none of us really knew what was behind it.
Was it alternative news or regular news?
It was alternative news. It was some online, video report, and we knew it was supernatural and it was powerful, but nobody knew. It wasn't really said what it was about. And so I love hearing the other end of this story from you.
Well, what happened according to the book is that the military has a holographic projection of Well, actually what happens when they breach the chamber in Romania, a holographic graphic projection is stirred up. I don't know how it's stirred up. I don't remember, but it's their they know of the other chambers. They know of the chamber apparently in Tibet because there's maps, holographic maps or whatnot. And when the chamber is breached by a Romanian-American alliance, it shows up in the one in Iraq.
Wow.
So the military is going, what in the hell is going on here?
Interesting.
Now this precipitates an investigation by the U.S. military proper under the jurisdiction of the President of the United States of America, not necessarily being orchestrated by the President, but under his jurisdiction as the Commander-in-Chief. And they do an investigation of what's going on in Romania, and they soon discover that there are American troops in Romania. Mm. And of course, the response by the President and the normal chain of command is, what in the hell are our troops doing there? Well, we don't know about it. So this creates an internal skirmish within the U.S. military and the secret sector in the U.S. military. And this precipitates the President of the United States to call his counterpart in Romania, the President of Romania, and saying, what's going on in Romania? And the President of Romania goes, I don't know. You tell me. And he does his own investigation and sees that his military proper is not involved in this. So, of course, the President also knows that he has Caesar and General Abadia, and I think he called, I don't remember if he called both of them or one of them, but he basically, General Abadia had to do a lot of diplomacy to convince the President to stay with him because he had to keep it from the President. You know, in other words, so there was a lot of diplomacy with this particular General Abadia so basically, there was a lot of uneasy political tension between the Romanians and the Americans. However, I can tell you from multiple sources that to corroborate this story, there were an inordinate amount of Americans in the small little resort town of Bușteni. Bușteni is a town I've stayed in, and you can catch a tram to the Sphinx from Bușteni. So in other words, if you want to set up an operation that's going to access the Sphinx, you're going to go to the town of Bușteni, where there's hotels, and there were so many Americans, and the locals were told not to talk about it. But you can find people with, oh, no question, there were plenty of Americans. Now, this is 2003. There's no alliance between America.
So that's about a dozen years ago.
Yes, 12 years ago. And there's no Americans. Americans will occasionally visit Romania, but, hundreds of people from the government. Yeah. So America was definitely doing something there at this particular time. Now, so this was more of the political intrigue that's discussed in the book, because there's always these political alliances and tensions between America and Romania. And these continue throughout the 4 books. It's never, but we'll see that America does have alliances with Romania, which it's never had. In fact, America is now using it to house military bases, and it's their point of defense or attack with regard to Russia and the Middle East. It's a big point, a strategic point. Now, Romania has always been a strategic point in the history of the world because it's at the center point between where East meets West.
I was noticing that on the map, like Istanbul is right next door to Romania.
So far.
And Greece is right next. I mean, it's interesting.
Greece
all the different
to the south,
countries, that are there.
Yes. But I would tell you, I did visit Bulgaria once, and I was once 40 yards away from Turkey at the tomb of Bubastis, and then visiting the Temple of Orpheus, I was maybe 40 miles from Greece. So those are 2 distant parts of the country, but yes, you're right in that area. And Romania is Grand Central Station of humanity, in actual fact, as one learns.
Could we get into where the language came from at this point, or are we?
Premature. It's premature in the context of this.
Okay.
Yes, it is premature. But I know I interested you with that when we were off the air.
Right.
But so basically where this story ends is that Radu is brought to the chamber, shown it, and he's allowed to write about it. And he writes about it. It's published in Romanian language, but only after he contacts the publisher who has just published the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project opened the door for this book to be published in Romania, where it's considered science fiction by many people, or most people, but it's allowed to, that's why it's not threatening if it's considered science fiction. But it's not science fiction, according to the author. And this is also in his personal letters to me as well, because I've had a personal correspondence with him. Now, the end of this book, my version of the book, talks about me going to Romania and meeting with David Anderson and hoping to get a mouthful, earful rather, of this stuff, of hearing that. And when I get there, our hotel has been sold out. We're arriving at 2 in the morning. We're driven up into the mountains. We get there at 4:30 in the morning. We are lost in Romania. We are lost without much of a hand to help us. And we end up not getting the tour we were promised, but I do make it to the Sphinx with the companionship of Dr. Joel Castellanos, a fractal scientist from the University of New Mexico, who was invited by David. So when he told me that he was from New Mexico, when we met at the airport, I say, "Oh, you must be part of the Time Travel Research Center in New Mexico," because there was one in New Mexico. He goes, "Time Travel Research Center? I know nothing about this." So that, he got a whole education. And he lectured on fractals at the Atlanticron camp. And of course, I go to the camp where I meet people, and this becomes the foundation for my adventures in Romania. Atlanticron paves the way. David is not forthcoming about much of anything until I get tremendously ill from perhaps eating something called fish. They don't call it this, fish head soup. They served this fish head soup, and it was from fish, and with fish that was caught in the Danube. It's not good to eat fish caught in the Danube if you're not Romanian and you're not acclimated, because the Danube is a very polluted river. So in any case, I got so sick. And then, this was fun. So I'd arranged for my publisher, Sorin Hormuz, to drive 2 hours from Bucharest to come and meet me at the camp. He goes to the camp and I'm nowhere to be seen. They say, "Oh, he's back at the hotel in the town of Chernovoda. And, go see him there if he'll talk to you." So it's 2 o'clock and I could not even, I was so sick. I'd never been so sick in my adult life. And he knocked on the door and I came and he says, "It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon." He says, I don't know if you can see me. I said, "Oh, sure, come in." He says, "I have a CD from Radu Cinemar." He had an audio CD for me to play. And of course, Radu wanted to send this to me. And I said, "No, wait till I'm in Romania. Because it's going to take forever in the mail. I don't trust the mail."
Interesting.
So he brought it to me, and I got, of course, I couldn't listen to the CD that day. So I had a nice meeting with Serene. We had a wonderful meeting. We get along very well. And, after a few hours, he went his way. And the next morning, I was well enough to go back to the camp. I mean, they offered to bring me a doctor, anything I wanted. They were very kind to me. And at that point, my companion who I was with told me how sick I was and that, she thought David should be more forthcoming with me. So David sat down with me when I got back. He made some time because he was very busy with actual projects he was doing. And he said, and he would always see us off because we had to take a boat every night and then take a ride into the town to sleep because we were not staying on the island. After that, I insist upon staying on the island every year. It's much more.
So is the Sphinx on an island or the camp is on?
This is not by the Sphinx. The camp is on an island.
Camp is on an island.
So I like to stay at the camp as opposed to, driving off, because things can get, excuse me. I just had a tremendous cramp in my leg.
Okay. So we've got, yeah, I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have to close this story and maybe start again another day, because I'm sure there's still more to tell, but yeah, go ahead and give us your kind of conclusion.
Yes, the cramp has subsided.
Okay.
But in any case, to wrap up this story, I was able to talk to David, but David really said, he says, I really can't talk. I'm going back in the time travel business. He says, that's about all I can tell you. I'm reincorporating as Anderson Multinational.
Wow.
And we'll have a website up in December, and I will be releasing new information in December. But what he did release that December was pretty little. It showed Anderson Multinational that he said he was now taking back ownership of the Time Travel Research Center in New Mexico. The one, of course, in Long Island was discontinued, and he was going back, as they say, back in the time travel business, and things would not come more revealed until the following year in 2009, when I would go back. And by that time, I was working on translating Radu's second book, having it translated because I can't translate it myself, and also taking another adventure, which I write about in that book. So this is like each book has, my participation in it, and adventures in it as well, because all of these things correlate. Now, as we wrap this up, basically I was able to tell you the focus of book one, and this set a platform of investigation. I think the most intriguing part.
Can you hold up book one for us again?
Is book one, Transylvanian Sunrise, and the book two is Transylvanian Moonrise.
Transylvanian Sunrise and Moonrise. I love it.
Yes, and of course I made up these titles because the titles in Romanian, they just don't work here. Mm-hmm. This was called Death's Head Future in Romanian. Initially called The Enemy Within. These are not good marketing titles.
No.
Transylvanian Moonrise was called 12 Days in the Mysterious Land of the Gods, which isn't a horrible title, but this one, they complement each other.
Right.
Now, the one thing I will tell you, the two things I will tell you from this book, since we're wrapping up, is that the first part of the book includes newspaper articles from Romania in the Romanian press that corroborate this story. Okay? Journalists, comments, and
very cool.
Yes, and the second part the second part I will tell you is Dr. Zen, who is the most intriguing character in this book, shows up in this book in the beginning, and it turns out he is much more than a doctor of the paranormal in China. He is also a Tibetan Lama.
Wow.
That is his antecedent.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he's able to amalgamate himself into the Chinese culture, which is no small task, being that he had to escape Tibet in the 1950s during the Chinese invasion.
Wow.
So he's managed to ingratiate himself with the Chinese culture, and he's a very delightfully mysterious character, and indeed a superhuman in the context that you have described. So I think, I think I'm going to have to come back again.
I know just from talking to you that there's a whole lot more story that we're going to be really excited to hear from you. I certainly was. So do you think there's a connection? I mean, I know that it's known that there's a lot of levels under the Sphinx in Egypt, and still to this day, I think there's a lot that the military has closed off, or the government has not allowed there to be a lot of exploration of. And I'm wondering if you think there's similar chambers under the Sphinx in Egypt, and if this Romanian Sphinx, if it connects with the Sphinx in Egypt.
Well, specifically to answer your question on that, in the third book, Mystery of Egypt, which I held up earlier, I'll hold it up again now. This book actually talks about one of the tunnels that goes to a similar chamber beneath the Giza Plateau. Now, this Giza Plateau, this chamber is inaccessible by the other chambers that are beneath the Sphinx. Those chambers that you allude to do indeed exist. I've written articles.
I've heard about a secret chamber that was inaccessible by the other chambers.
Well, there was a friend of mine, Chelsea Floor, who I referred to as Madam X. She actually was in the underground of the chambers. There was footage taken of it. It was, part of it was flooded with water. The cinematographer was a man named Boris Said. And all the people associated with it had great cataclysmic events happen in their life. Chelsea died of cancer.
Wow.
Just in the last year. She was one of my best friends, a very sweet lady. And going to Egypt was the high point of her life. And she wasn't going on these tours to Egypt. She was getting into the real secret stuff because she knew Egypt better than anybody. And
I'm getting
better than all the tour guides put together. And she was sort of the esoteric guide to this documentary that was being done that was never shown. Instead, what was done was this Emmy award-winning joke with John Anthony West that won an Emmy, but it was like, it was all showing not the real thing. And that was like Charlton Heston narrated it. And it was like sleight of hand. And it was not John Anthony West's fault. He was doing what he did. But I'm saying is there was a whole other side to this that was not going to be told. The footage of this from Boris Said, who died, he was attributed to be one of the casualties. His footage was actually sold for a short period of time, I believe, off Coast to Coast, or announced on Coast to Coast. This is back in the 90s. And I only have one friend who actually helped me get to Romania. I think she had the footage, but she could never dig it up. And there's a lot of guarded energy around that footage. There are spiritual guardians around this energy.
I bet.
Yes. And so then the other man who helped fund it was, he had a series of heart attacks. And he's still alive, but he did a lot of groundbreaking work and of course that documentary is never going to see the light of day, or the footage. We don't care about the documentary. We just want to see the footage. However, all of these chambers that they were accessing do not have access to this chamber that was accessed by the Romanian team with an American. I think 2 Americans were on that trip. There were 3 of them that went underneath the Giza Plateau. And there was a tunnel where some ancient civilization had attempted to connect to this. They knew it was there. They're trying to find it, but they could not connect. Now, so anyway, this chamber beneath the Giza Plateau has a device where you can actually time travel in your mind. You cannot time travel physically. So you can go back and look at the history of the world. It's much more extensive. There's also archival records in, I guess, what you call slabs, which we could roughly equate to a CD that would house all sorts of archives of time.
Very cool.
And many of these were taken back to the Pentagon to study. And, so this is a whole nother chapter that's sort of, included in the book. And this is what, to answer your question about Egypt. And I believe that when this book was put into English, I believe that this contributed to the riots in Egypt that occurred, because they were simultaneously after this book came out. And I think Egyptians who do not read Romanian read English, and they say, what the hell's going on in our country? And how come the United States and Romania are accessing our country and we can't access it? And they started to ask questions. They started to riot. And then I had written to Radu about this, and he basically indicated that I was right. Of
course.
That this is politics behind the politics.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know that it's true, but this is what I suspected. And so world politics, there's always stuff going on behind the scenes in world politics.
Peter, I think we're going to have to continue this on another show. I mean, it's such exciting information. And what I want to do is just say thank you so much for bringing this to us, for taking the time out of your busy life where you are creating more tools that people can learn from. You might want to repeat the name of your website where they can find you, and we'll also put that in the links under this video.
Skybooks.usa.com is where you can purchase the books. Skybooks.usa.com. Also, the books are available on Kindle, Amazon, Nook, iTunes, and in bookstores. And furthermore, there's a website which is informational, digitalmontauk.com. And I will, as I say, I'm presenting, working on videos. I finished 5 of them that explain the theory of time travel.
And Montauk is spelled?
Montauk.
Perfect. And just as we explore these adventures of the mysterious and these really exciting things that kind of percolate up from our past and are teaching us about our now so that we can become more conscious, we can wake up to the potential of who we really are as 21st century superhumans and beyond, that we begin utilizing our skill and our brilliance to be a peaceful civilization on planet Earth where humanity is recognized as one race of beings and where we can discover within ourselves this pure creative potential that comes out of love and allow things that have been practiced in outside of love to disintegrate into our past. And hopefully we can start using these things that we're understanding today because of our science to launch us into a very exciting kind of new future. And that's my hope, and my work with 21st Century Superhuman is that we discover these clues and these out of these mysteries that we're unveiling. And I want to give thanks to Naturally Better TV. This is a Naturally Better TV show. If you're not used to watching online television, basically we have a website called naturallybetter.tv. You find us there. There's myself as a host with the 21st Century Superhuman guest shows, and there are many other really amazing hosts who are bringing forth some of the cutting edge information available on the planet. We say, put your TV in the corner until it's figured out something good to say. And meanwhile, keep educating yourself, listen to these shows, begin activating your own awareness of what's going on in the world. So, Peter, any words of wisdom for you as we say goodbye here, and we'll prepare to have another show coming up pretty soon?
The only thing I'll say is that you conduct a good interview, at least with me, and it's you get a lot out of me, say a lot more out of me than somebody else might.
Great.
So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I think the material you're sharing is so exciting, fascinating, and like I said, I get waves of energy as you're sharing it. I know that this is a really high transmission, and whatever level we can understand it on, it's a very exciting piece of information to begin integrating into where we're headed with not just time travel, but the understanding of the advanced information that was here in our past that we're beginning to have the ability to catch glimpses of. So thank you so much. I think one of these days, I don't know, I mean, I want to encourage people to read your books because I think there's an exciting story here. And then your newsletters and your current teachings about not just time travel, but our ability to access higher levels of who we are. So thank you so much. Many blessings and much love to everybody out there. And Peter, we'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right. Adios.